The eldest girl shoved her little brother behind her so fast he stumbled, hitting the dirt with a soft grunt. She didn't even look back. Her eyes stayed locked on the cowboy standing a few paces away, his shadow stretching long across the empty road. "Back off," she snapped, voice sharp from hunger and fear. The cowboy froze where he stood, hands raised just enough to show he wasn't reaching for a weapon. His jaw tightened the way a man tenses before taking a blow. The girl swallowed hard. "You got food?" she asked. No answer. Not even a breath loud enough to hear. "Can you talk or not?" The cowboy kept staring at her, unreadable, like every word she threw at him bounced against a wall inside his head. She stepped forward an inch. "Say something." Still nothing. The silence pushed into her nerves like a splinter. Her youngest brother whimpered behind her. She jerked her chin at the cowboy. "You hear him? He's starving." The cowboy's gaze moved slowly to the boy, then to the middle child hovering nearby, thin as a stick. He reached into his coat with steady movements, and the girl's shoulders tightened. "Don't," she warned. But he didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a strip of jerky, dropped it on the ground between them, and stepped back. The girl stared at it like it might bite. Her middle brother whispered, "Could be poison." "Nobody poisons jerky, dummy," she whispered back. "Could be a trap," he pressed. "Everything's a trap with folks like him." "He ain't even talking," she said. "That don't make him safe." The youngest crawled closer. "I'm hungry," he murmured. The girl kneeled, grabbed the jerky, sniffed it, then tore a piece off with her teeth. She waited. Nothing burned. Nothing crumbled. She chewed and nodded. "Eat." The boys fell on it like wolves. The cowboy stood still as stone while they devoured every crumb. The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Why you out here?" she asked. Silence again. It wasn't the silence of a man who refused to answer. It was the silence of a man who had lost the right to words. The girl could see it in his eyes, something broken, something bruised too deep to show on skin. She rose to her feet. "We ain't got nothin' else," she told him. "If you're gonna hurt us, do it now." He didn't move. Didn't reach for anything. Just watched her with that tight jaw and tired stare. She took a small step closer. "You don't seem like the type." Her middle brother tugged her sleeve. "Stop talking to him. We need to go." She shook him off. "We got nowhere to go." The cowboy turned away then, slow and deliberate, as if he'd made some quiet decision she couldn't hear. He started walking down the road, long steady strides that didn't invite anyone to follow. The girl hesitated. Her stomach twisted at the thought of another night out in the cold ditch, another morning with no food. She glanced at her brothers. "Come on," she said. "He ain't gonna hurt nobody." "How you know?" her brother whispered. "I just do." They trailed behind him. Not close. Not far. A careful distance, like stray dogs unsure if the hand reaching out would feed them or strike them. The cowboy didn't turn around. Didn't speed up. Didn't slow down. His silence was strange, heavy, like he was dragging a whole other world behind him that none of them could see. The wind kicked up dust along the road, stinging their faces. The girl pulled her youngest closer, shielding him with her arm. The cowboy finally stopped. He didn't look back, but he angled his body like he was listening to the faint shuffle of their feet. Then he stepped forward again. The girl took it as permission. They kept walking. The day thinned into a chilly gray that clung to their skin. When the cowboy suddenly paused, the girl froze too. He turned slightly, enough for her to see the edge of his coat lift in the wind. She reached out before she could stop herself and grabbed the fabric. "Please, don't go." Her fingers were still hooked in his coat when the cowboy finally turned his head, just enough for one gray eye to catch hers. The cold air pushed between them, sharp enough to make her hand tremble, but she didn't let go. Her brothers hovered behind her, breathing hard, waiting for him to move or speak or do anything that made sense. He didn't. He just stood there like a man carved out of the road itself. The girl swallowed and loosened her grip. "We don't know where else to go." He didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't shake his head. He just shifted his stance a little and lifted one hand, pointing up toward the hills rising in a long line of dark brush and gray stone. "Where are you taking us?" her middle brother asked. Silence. The girl huffed. "He ain't gonna answer you." "Then why follow him?" the boy shot back. "Because he fed us," she said. "One piece of jerky don't make him good. It's more than anybody else gave us." The cowboy lowered his hand and started walking toward the ridge path. No hesitation. No invitation. Just a direction. The girl took her brothers by their sleeves. "We're going." "You're crazy," the older boy muttered, but he followed anyway. The cowboy led them off the road, onto a narrow dirt path snaking between brittle grass and dead stumps. The wind whistled through broken branches like a warning. The kids whispered non-stop. "Why ain't he talking? Maybe he can't. Or maybe he's hiding something. Everybody's hiding something." The cowboy kept moving, step steady, shoulders stiff beneath his coat. He didn't look back once. The path climbed higher, and the trees thickened around them. Shadows stretched long across the dirt, thin and crooked like fingers reaching out. A crow cawed somewhere above them, loud enough to make the youngest boy jump. "Feels like something's watchin' us," he whispered. The cowboy paused mid-step. Completely still. Like he heard something nobody else could. The girl's heart kicked against her ribs. "What is it?" No answer. He turned his head a fraction, listening to the woods with a frown carved deep into his face. Then he walked on. "See?" her brother hissed. "He knows something, Dot." "Everybody knows something," she said again, softer this time. They kept climbing. The air got colder, tighter, like it didn't want them up there. The trees creaked, and every sound felt too close. The cowboy paused twice more, each time raising his chin slightly as if checking the wind for danger. He wasn't scared. He was remembering. The girl could feel it in the way he moved, like his boots were stepping through two worlds at once. The path finally opened into a small clearing near a bend in the ridge. The shack sat at the edge of it, tucked into the hill like it wanted to disappear. The roof sagged. The porch leaned. The windows were clouded with dust. But the walls looked solid, and smoke curled faintly from a half-hidden chimney. "That where he lives?" the youngest whispered. "Looks haunted," the older boy muttered. The cowboy walked straight to the door without glancing at them. He hesitated only once when his hand brushed the latch, as if the wood held some old memory he wasn't ready to face. The girl watched him closely. "You sure about this?" her brother asked. "No, then why we? Because he hasn't hurt us," she said. "And because we ain't got a choice." The cowboy pushed the door open. It creaked loud, the sound scraping through the quiet like something waking up. He stepped aside, not looking at them, not motioning them in, but leaving the doorway open like a silent bridge between fear and hope. The girl stared into the dim room, heart thudding. Her brothers waited for her to decide. The cowboy stood like a shadow beside the doorway, offering nothing but the space to enter. She took a breath, tightened her grip on her youngest brother's hand, and stepped forward into the unknown. The shack door creaked wider as the girl stepped inside, dragging her brothers behind her. The air hit them first, thick, stale, heavy like it had been sitting for years without moving. Dust floated in thin beams of weak light slipping through the cloudy windows. The cowboy followed them in, shutting the door with a soft thud that made the youngest boy flinch. He didn't speak, didn't look at them, didn't point where they should go. He moved straight to a small wooden table pushed into the corner, took a pot from the hearth, and set out 3 bowls with slow, practiced motions. The girl whispered to her brothers, "Stay close." The middle boy sniffed the air. "What's that smell?" The youngest wrinkled his nose. "Smells like sadness." Everything smells like sadness when you're starving, she muttered. The cowboy ladled stew into each bowl, the steam rising like ghosts. He placed them in a line on the table, then stepped back again, hands loose at his sides. The kids didn't move. They watched him like he might snatch the food away. He didn't. He pointed at the bowls once, then turned to tend the fire, giving them space. The girl nudged her brothers forward. Eat. They rushed the table. The stew was thin but warm, chunks of potato floating in cloudy broth. To them, it tasted like a feast. As they ate, the girl's eyes drifted to the fourth chair tucked neatly at the end of the table. The chair felt wrong somehow, like someone should have been sitting there. Who used to sit there? She asked. The cowboy froze mid-motion. His back stiffened, shoulders rising slightly as if bracing for a blow. His hand trembled where it hovered over the fire poker. Mister, the girl pressed quietly. His fingers tightened around the handle, then loosened. He didn't turn around. Didn't breathe loud enough to show he heard her. The girl's gaze shifted around the room. She saw a high shelf, coated in dust except for 3 objects spaced carefully apart. A sheriff's badge scorched black around the edges. A small wooden toy horse missing a leg. And an old letter, half-burned, edges curled like leaves after a drought. He was someone, the girl whispered. Someone important. Her middle brother shook his head. If he was important, why is he here? Because important people fall harder, she said. The cowboy finally stepped away from the fire and sat in the far corner of the room, knees drawn up slightly, head bowed. He looked like he was trying to take up as little space as possible, like his presence might break the room if he wasn't careful. The girl watched him while her brothers shoveled food into their mouths. You lived here alone? She asked. No reply. For how long? Nothing. What happened to you? Still nothing. But she could see answers in the twitch of his jaw, in the way his eyes stayed fixed on the floorboards. The stew warmed their stomachs, but the air stayed cold. The house felt alive, old breaths trapped in the walls. Every creak sounded like a memory shifting in its sleep. The wind rattled the windowpane, and the youngest boy jumped again. This place is scary, he whispered. Nothing's gonna hurt you, the girl said, though even she didn't fully believe it. Her brothers finished eating, wiping the bowls clean with their fingers. The cowboy stayed in the corner, elbows on his knees, like he wasn't part of the same world. Silence crawled across the room. The girl dared another look at the half-burned badge, the letter, the toy horse. All 3 felt like pieces of a story no one wanted to remember. She tried to imagine the cowboy speaking, laughing, holding a child, living a life that didn't end in banishment and ash. She couldn't picture it. The youngest boy tugged on her sleeve. Sis? She looked down. His wide eyes shone with something between fear and curiosity. He glanced at the walls, the shadows, the quiet man in the corner. Mister, you got ghosts here? The boy's question hung in the room like dust refusing to settle. The cowboy lifted his head just enough for the firelight to catch the edge of his face. His eyes didn't move, but something in them tightened, a flicker of pain or warning or memory that made the girl straighten. The youngest boy swallowed. Did I say something wrong? The girl shook her head softly. No. He just don't like the question. The middle boy leaned forward. You got ghosts here or not? Still nothing. The cowboy looked away, jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped beneath his skin. The girl studied him. You was a sheriff? His shoulders flinched like the word hit him. You had a badge, she added, nodding toward the shelf. A burned one. The middle boy crossed his arms. Why'd they burn it? Why's he in a shack? The youngest murmured. Why can't he talk? The cowboy shot them a look then, quick and sharp, the first hint of real anger. The girl held up a hand to silence her brothers, but it was too late. The questions had cracked something open in him. He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor, and paced toward the table with stiff, uneven steps. His hand drifted to the shelf but didn't touch anything. You mad? The middle boy asked. The cowboy shook his head once, but the movement looked forced, like his body didn't believe the lie. Then why you look like that? The cowboy closed his eyes for a second, as if steadying himself, then turned his back to them. The girl lowered her voice. You ain't dangerous, are you? His breath hitched. Just slightly. Enough to answer without words. She rose from her seat and stepped closer, slow enough not to spook him. Somebody hurt you, she said. That's why you're like this. He didn't turn around. Didn't even shift. But his hand lifted to his arm as if reacting on instinct. He pulled back the edge of his sleeve before he could stop himself, revealing the jagged, uneven burn scars running along his forearm. The youngest gasped. The middle boy stepped back. The girl's breath caught. Who did that to you? She asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The way he slowly raised his arm and pointed toward the window said everything. The distant lights of the town shimmered faintly through the glass. The girl followed his gesture. Them? The cowboy nodded once. Barely. Enough. The room felt smaller then, walls tightening with the memory he couldn't voice. The wind pressed against the shack like it wanted inside, rattling the windows harder than before. The fire hissed as if reacting to the shift in the air. The middle boy whispered, Why'd they do it? The cowboy turned, eyes dark, haunted, swirling with something between fury and grief. His silence carried weight now, heavy, sharp, almost violent in the way it filled the room. The girl stepped closer. You didn't do something wrong, did you? He shook his head. They hurt you for a reason though, she said. Maybe a bad one. His hands clenched and unclenched. His body trembled with the effort to keep the memories where they were buried. The youngest boy stepped beside his sister, voice quiet. You tried to help somebody, didn't you? The cowboy's breathing changed. Barely. A tremor through the ribs if anyone looked closely. The girl's eyes widened. You did, she whispered. You helped someone and they punished you for it. The cowboy touched the edge of the scar again, his jaw locked in that same tight line. He didn't nod. Didn't shake his head. But the tremor in his fingers answered for him. The girl moved another step closer. Was it a woman? He froze. That was enough. She exhaled, heart thudding. They hurt you for helping somebody, she said, voice soft but sure. The cowboy turned toward her fully then, eyes burning with the truth he couldn't say aloud. The fire behind him popped, sending sparks into the air like pieces of memory flying loose. The wind slammed against the shack once more, harder this time, shaking the walls like a trapped animal. The girl didn't flinch. She met his eyes and whispered the truth she finally understood. They hurt you for helping somebody, didn't they? Her whispered words hung between them, sharp enough to cut the air. The cowboy didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give anything away except the faint tremor running through his hands. He stood there like a man caught between running and collapsing. The girl took a slow breath, steadying herself as her brothers pressed in close. It's okay, she said quietly. You ain't gotta say it. His head dropped a little, like he was ashamed of a truth he never chose. The middle boy wiped his nose and muttered, Why would they burn a man for helping somebody? The youngest whispered, Because someone powerful told him to. The cowboy flinched again. Just a twitch, but enough. The girl stepped closer. Was it the families down there? The ones with the big coats? His jaw tightened. That was the first sign. The second came when his eyes shifted, not to the kids, not to the fire, but toward the window where the faint glow of town lights flickered like distant warning lanterns. The youngest boy hugged himself. Them men scared us, he mumbled. Real bad. The cowboy's eyes snapped to him, sharp and alert. The girl nodded. We know them men. We know what they do. Sis, don't, the middle boy whispered. She cut him off with a look. He deserves to know. He helped someone once. Maybe he'll help again. The cowboy blinked slowly, as if bracing himself. The girl's voice dropped. Them men wear big coats. The cowboy's breath stilled. Red patches on the arms, the middle boy added. The cowboy's fists clenched at his sides. They came to our house, the youngest said in a tiny voice. At night. The cowboy looked away, throat working like he was swallowing fire. They burned it, the girl said, her voice thin but hard. Burned it clean off the ground. Took our mama, the middle boy whispered. Dragged her out screamin'. The cowboy's face twisted, rage and grief and something older than both. He stepped back like the memories hit him in the chest. The girl watched him carefully. You know them men, she said. Don't you? He nodded once. Barely. The boy gasped. He knows them? He knows what they did, she said. Same as us. The cowboy reached into the drawer of a small table and pulled out a tattered map folded so many times the edges were soft. He laid it on the table and smoothed it out with shaking hands. The kids gathered around him. He pointed to a dark-circled patch of land near the hills. The girl felt her stomach drop. That's where they took her, she said. That's where we ran from. The cowboy tapped the same place again. His message was simple. Clear. He knew. And he had been there once too. The middle boy stepped back. You mean, they hurt him for helping Mama? The cowboy didn't breathe for a moment. Then he gave a slow, painful nod. The youngest boy sniffed. Mama was good. The cowboy's face broke, only for a second, but long enough for the girl to see the truth beneath the silence. He reached for something on the shelf, then hesitated. Instead, he knelt on one knee in front of the girl, slow and heavy like the motion cost him everything. He removed his hat and held it out to her. The girl froze. The boys stared. The cowboy kept the hat in his hands, offering it not as a gift but as a promise. A vow. Her breath shook. Why you givin' me this? He didn't answer, but he gently pushed the hat toward her until her hands lifted on their own. When she touched it, something in the room shifted, like the house itself inhaled. The middle boy whispered, Sis, what's he doin'? She swallowed. He's sayin' he'll look out for us. The cowboy lowered his head in a gesture that was almost reverence. Almost apology. Almost grief. The girl felt her throat close. Mister, we ain't got nobody but you. The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and shaking. The cowboy looked up. In his eyes was the truth he couldn't speak, they were his responsibility now. And he wasn't letting them go. The girl was still holding his hat when the cowboy rose to his feet, slow and steady, like he had finally accepted a weight he'd been running from. The fire crackled low behind him, throwing tired light across the room. The kids stayed close, staring at him as if waiting for their next breath to come from his chest. The girl tightened her grip on the hat's brim. She didn't know what the gesture meant in full, but she felt it settle deep inside her, warm and frightening at the same time. The cowboy reached for his rifle leaning by the wall, not with threat, but with the careful motion of a man who had lived too long expecting danger at his door. Before the girl could ask anything, a hard knock slammed against the wood. All three kids jumped. The youngest grabbed her arm. Sis, the middle boy whispered fast, panic already rising. They found us. Another knock, louder, like a fist meant to break the hinges. Don't open it, the middle boy hissed. Don't let em in. He ain't opening it, the girl whispered back, though her voice shook around the edges. The cowboy didn't move toward the door. He stood perfectly still, rifle cradled loosely but ready, eyes narrowed at the wood as if he could see straight through it. Another knock echoed through the small shack, followed by boots shifting outside in the dirt. A rough voice called out, muffled but close. Open up. Silence clamped down over the room. The girl's breath held in her throat. The voice spoke again, louder. We know you're in there, Marshall. All three kids whipped their heads toward the cowboy. "Marshall," the middle boy whispered. The cowboy didn't look at them. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe in any way that showed fear. But his hands tightened on the rifle until his knuckles went white. Another voice joined the first, this one angrier. "Thought we wouldn't hear you were still lurkin' around up here." A third voice laughed. "Should've stayed gone, Marshall. Ain't nobody want you back." The girl touched the cowboy's coat. "Why re they calling you that?" He didn't answer, but his jaw locked in a familiar way that told her he once wore a badge, once held power, once stood against the men outside, and paid for it. The men outside shifted again. Boots grinding. Gravel crunching. The girl whispered, "What do we do?" The cowboy raised his hand, palm flat, telling them silently to stay low and behind him. The kids crouched behind the table, hearts banging against their ribs. The fire sputtered as if it sensed the danger pressing in. "We know who you're hidin' in there," the first voice growled. "Those brats belong to us." "We ain't nobody's brats," the middle boy whispered fiercely. The girl grabbed his arm. "Quiet." The cowboy moved to the window, staying just out of sight. He peeked through the edge of the curtain with the eyes of a man who'd survived worse than what waited outside. Shadows dragged across the porch. 3, maybe 4 men. Maybe more hidden. Their coats were long. Their voices were familiar. The cowboy stepped back from the window, face carved in stone. The youngest boy tugged on his sister's sleeve, whispering fast. "Sis, I'm scared." "I know," she breathed. "I know." The cowboy adjusted his grip on the rifle, each motion slow and calm, like he was walking himself back into the role those men wanted to bury. He took one breath, steady and grounding. Then the first man outside lost his patience. "Last chance, Marshall. Open the damn door." The cowboy didn't move. The girl watched him with wide eyes. She could feel something rising in him, a storm he'd kept locked down since the day he was burned, banished, stripped of his voice and his life. The wind outside rattled the windows so hard the walls quivered. The fire hissed like it knew a fight was coming. The girl whispered, "Mister, you don't gotta do this alone." The cowboy glanced back at her. Just once. Just long enough for her to see the truth in his eyes. He'd always been alone. Until now. A shadow darkened the crack beneath the door. A boot lifted. The voice barked, "Kick it in." The cowboy raised his rifle, shoulders set, stance unshakable. And the door exploded inward as a boot slammed through the wood, splintering the shack in two. The door crashed inward with a violent crack, wood exploding across the room as the first man lunged inside. The cowboy didn't blink. His rifle swung up in one smooth arc, smashing into the man's cheekbone with a hollow thud. The intruder collapsed before his shout finished leaving his throat. Another man barreled through the broken frame, screaming, "Shoulda stayed gone." He swung a rusted pipe straight toward the cowboy's head. The cowboy sidestepped fast, grabbed the man's coat, and slammed him into the wall so hard the boards trembled. The girl ducked behind the table with her brothers as splinters rained down. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Stay down," she whispered, gripping them tightly. A third man shoved his way in, pistol already raised. "Traitor," he barked. "You think you can hide?" He didn't finish. The cowboy struck the pistol sideways with the rifle barrel, sending the shot into the ceiling in a burst of dust and sparks. The youngest boy cried out. "Left," the girl yelled without thinking. The cowboy spun just as the first intruder staggered back to his feet, knife flashing. The man lunged. The cowboy caught his wrist, twisted hard, and forced the blade toward the floor. Their boots scraped across the boards in a desperate tangle. The man spat, "You and that woman should have burned together." The cowboy's eyes darkened. He drove his knee into the man's stomach, then elbowed him across the jaw, dropping him again. The fire flared as if reacting to the fury in the room. Another intruder crawled toward the fallen pistol. The girl spotted him and shouted, "Gun, he's reaching. The cowboy kicked the weapon across the room before the man's hand closed around it. He stomped the man's wrist, making him howl, then struck him in the temple with the rifle butt. The middle boy peeked over the table. "Behind you!" The cowboy whirled. The man with the pipe came swinging again, face twisted in rage. The cowboy blocked the blow with the rifle, shoved the man backward, and slammed him into the floorboards. The final intruder, a broad man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped over the wrecked doorframe. "Look at you," he sneered. "Still fighting for the dead." The cowboy's stance shifted. "Subtle. Deadly." The scarred man spat. "You should have let her die like we told you." That sentence split the air open. The cowboy charged without hesitation, grabbed the man by the front of his coat, and threw him into the table. The bowls shattered. Stew splashed across the floor. The girl shielded her brothers as the cowboy pinned the scarred man down, fists hammering again and again. The man choked out broken words. "You should've burned." The cowboy froze mid-strike. His breath tore from him in ragged waves. For a split second, the room went silent except for the crackle of fire and the soft whimpering of the youngest boy. Then the cowboy shoved himself backward, stumbling as if the words had hit harder than any fist. The scarred man collapsed lifeless against the wall. One of the injured intruders coughed wetly from the floor, blood pooling beneath him. "You'll never outrun it, Marshall," he rasped. "Never." The cowboy didn't respond. He looked at his hands instead, blood smeared across his knuckles, dripping from his fingertips, marking the deep grooves of old scars burned into his skin. His entire body trembled like a storm finally breaking loose. The girl slowly rose from behind the table, keeping her brothers tucked close. "Mister," she said softly. He didn't look at her. His breathing grew uneven, chest rising too fast, eyes locked on the body sprawled across his floor. The middle boy whispered, "Is he hurt?" "No," the girl murmured, recognizing something worse. "He's remembering." The cowboy backed into the corner as if he couldn't bear the space around him. The fire popped sharply, making him flinch. Blood dripped from his knuckles onto the boards in slow, steady drops. The youngest boy tugged her sleeve. "Is he gonna fall?" She swallowed. "Maybe." The cowboy braced a hand on the wall, shaking so hard the lamp beside him wobbled. His throat worked like he was trying to force something out, a breath, a sound, a memory buried too deep. The girl stepped forward despite her fear. "Mister," she whispered, "you saved us." He didn't move. Didn't blink. He just trembled harder as the floor soaked up the blood around his boots, every drop a piece of the life he tried to leave behind. The cowboy's trembling wouldn't stop. His hands shook so violently the blood on them smeared into dark streaks, dripping down his wrists like the past refusing to stay buried. He stared at the floor as if something under the boards was calling to him. The girl stepped closer, slow and careful. Her brothers clung to her shirt, their breaths small and frightened. "Mister," she said softly. "Please look at us." He didn't. His chest rose too fast, too hard, like he was drowning in the very air he breathed. The middle boy whispered, "Sis, he ain't okay." The girl nodded. "I know." She crouched beside the cowboy, though her hands shook just as much as his. "Who was she?" she whispered. "The woman you helped." The cowboy's eyes lifted, barely. The question hit him like a blow. A tremor ripped through his shoulders. The youngest boy edged closer. "We won't be scared," he whispered. "Just tell us." The cowboy breathed out, one broken, fragile sound that wasn't quite a word, wasn't quite a sob. Then he reached to the inner pocket of his coat with slow, shaking fingers. The kids watched, breath held, as he pulled out a small locket worn thin around the edges, its silver dulled by soot and time. He held it out with both hands, as if it were something holy. The girl took it gently. Her fingers brushed the metal, warm from his touch. She opened it. Inside was a small portrait of a woman, soft eyes, tired smile, hair pulled back like someone who worked too hard for too long. The girl's breath caught. "That's Mama," she whispered. The boys leaned in. Their faces collapsed. "That's her," the youngest cried. "That's really her." The cowboy looked away as tears blurred the girl's vision. "You knew her," she said. "You knew our mama." He shut his eyes, pained, as if the memory burned him anew. The girl held the locket against her chest. "What happened?" she whispered. "What did they do to her?" The cowboy's body tightened. His head dipped. And then the memories ripped through him like a storm he couldn't hold back. He wasn't telling them with words, he was reliving it in the jerk of his breath, in the tension in his shoulders, in the haunted way his hands pressed against his thighs as if bracing for impact. The girl put a hand on his arm. "Show us," she whispered. "If you can't say it, just show us." His eyes opened slowly, full of fire and grief. He lifted one shaking hand and touched the scarred skin along his jaw. Then he pressed that same hand toward the fire. The flames hissed and flared as if recognizing him. "Fire," the girl whispered. The cowboy flinched. Her mind filled in the rest, the heat, the smoke, the screams. He tapped his chest, then pointed to the locket. "He carried her," the girl murmured. "Through the fire." The cowboy's breath shuddered. He nodded once, just once, but it broke him open. "She was alive," the middle boy whispered. "You saved her." The cowboy's jaw clenched. His eyes burned. He lifted both hands, palms up, showing old burned scars hidden beneath newer bruises. The youngest boy whispered, "They tried to stop you." The cowboy's silence said yes. The girl swallowed hard. "She told you our names," she said softly. His eyes closed again. A tear slipped down his cheek, silent, heavy, unhidden. The girl touched his hand. "She trusted you," she whispered. "You were the last one she trusted." The cowboy's breath cracked. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking with everything he'd held inside for too long. The girl moved closer and wrapped her arms around him. For a brief moment, he stiffened like touch might burn him worse than fire. Then he let out a low, broken sound, half grief, half release, and leaned into the embrace as if he'd been waiting years for someone to believe him. The middle boy wiped his eyes. "It wasn't your fault," he whispered. The youngest added, "Mama wouldn't blame you." The cowboy trembled harder, caught somewhere between pain and relief. The girl pressed the locket into his palm and held his hand tight. "You tried to save her," she whispered, voice steady now. "And they punished you for it." His fingers closed around the locket like he was clutching a heartbeat. The fire crackled softly, less angry now, almost gentle, lighting the room with a warm, aching glow as the truth settled between them, heavy but finally spoken in silence. The girl's hand was still wrapped around his when he finally lifted his head. The locket sat in his palm like a living thing, glowing faintly in the fire's soft light. His breathing steadied, but only just. The weight of the truth pressed over them in a heavy, aching silence. The middle boy wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. "What do we do now?" The youngest whispered, "We can't stay here." The girl looked at the cowboy, searching his eyes for something, fear, doubt, guidance, anything. Instead she found resolve settling into his features like iron cooling into shape. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled, steady. He picked up his rifle, checking the chamber with quiet precision. The girl straightened. "You're going back, aren't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way he tightened the strap across his chest said everything. The middle boy stepped forward. "They'll kill you." The cowboy glanced at him, expression calm but carved with long-buried fury. The boy swallowed. "They'll kill all of us." The cowboy shook his head once, firm and final. The girl stood. "Then we're going with you." He hesitated, gaze flicking between them. His jaw tightened with the silent protest of a man who had lost too many people to let new ones walk willingly into danger. The girl didn't move. "You saved Mama," she said. "Even if you couldn't save her life, you saved her spirit. And you saved ours. We're not letting you walk alone again." The cowboy stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, soft, grateful, resigned. The girl exhaled shakily. "Then we go at dawn." The cowboy didn't wait for dawn. He moved toward the back room and began gathering supplies: threadbare blankets, a half-full canteen, a tin of dried food, a whetstone for the rifle. The kids watched, whispering among themselves. "He's serious. Real serious. We ain't ready for this." "We weren't ready for any of it," the girl whispered. When the cowboy was done, he stepped to the door and opened it just enough for cold night air to pour inside. Fog curled at the threshold like fingers reaching into the shack. The moon hung low, pale and tired. The girl shivered. "We leaving now?" He nodded. "But it's dark." He looked at her with meaning she understood instantly. Night hid the hunted. Dawn exposed them. She tightened her grip on the hat he had given her. "All right," she whispered. "Let's go." They stepped outside together. The cold wrapped around them like a warning. The cowboy led the way, his stride slow but steady, guiding them along a narrow deer path that wound between thorn bushes and dead branches. The kids huddled close behind him, their breaths white and fragile in the air. The forest was quieter than before. Too quiet. The youngest whispered, "Feels wrong." The girl squeezed his shoulder. "It's just the dark." "No," he murmured. "It's the land. It remembers things." The cowboy paused briefly, scanning the tree line. The shadows seemed to listen. A crow croaked somewhere overhead, startling the middle boy. "Why's it so creepy?" he whispered. "Because they did bad things out here," the girl said. The cowboy didn't turn, but his shoulders tensed as if confirming her words. They continued climbing the ridge until the trees thinned and the land opened into a sweeping overlook. Below them, the valley lay drowned in fog, a pale river of smoke drifting between hills. And there, rising through the mist like a bruise against the land, was the town. Silent. Waiting. Watching. The girl's breath hitched. "Looks different from up here." The cowboy stared long and hard, something dark flickering across his features. The middle boy whispered, "We really goin' down there?" The cowboy nodded once. The youngest tugged her sleeve. "Sis, I'm scared." "Me too," she admitted. "But we ain't running anymore." The cowboy turned to them, raising one hand slightly, palm out, not a warning, not an order, but a promise. Then he started walking down the slope. The kids followed without hesitation. The fog curled around their legs, swallowing their steps, making everything feel half real, half dream. The closer they drew to town, the heavier the air got, like the land itself remembered fire and screams and betrayal. Their breaths quickened. Their hearts thudded. But none of them slowed. The cowboy led them straight through the mist, toward the place where everything had broken once, and where something new might be forged again. The girl clutched the locket tight and whispered into the fog, "Mama, we're coming." And the town rose ahead, dark and waiting, like the final gate before the truth. The fog thinned as they reached the edge of town, dissolving into the empty main road where lanterns flickered weakly against the dawn. The cowboy walked ahead without slowing, his rifle slung across his back, his posture straight and unshakable. The kids followed close behind, clutching each other as silence settled over the street like dust. A stray dog barked once from behind a fence, then hid. Windows shifted. Curtains twitched. People recognized the shape of the man returning from exile. Murmurs rose like a quiet storm. "Is that him? The marshal? Thought he was dead." The cowboy didn't look at them. He kept walking toward the town square, toward the platform where the old families liked to stand above everyone else. The girl swallowed hard. "They're watching." "Let 'em," the middle boy muttered, though his voice trembled. The youngest clung to her hand. I don't like this. Neither do I, she whispered, but we're here now. When they stepped into the square, it was already filling with townspeople pulled by fear, curiosity, or guilt. The cowboy stopped at the center, shoulders squared. The kid stood beside him, small but unyielding. A door slammed open. Then another. The old families emerged from their grand houses, dressed in long coats with red patches stitched proudly along the sleeves. Their boots echoed across the boards as they descended the steps like a row of crows smelling fresh wounds. The sheriff walked in front of them, a pale smirk stretched across his face. "Well, look who crawled out of the ashes," he drawled. "Marshal returns." The cowboy didn't react. Didn't blink. The sheriff clicked his tongue. "You really thought you could walk back in after everything? After what you did?" The girl stepped forward. "He didn't do nothing wrong." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "And who are you?" The girl lifted her chin. "We're the ones you tried to steal." Murmurs exploded. The cowboy stayed still, eyes locked on the sheriff like he was reading every lie the man had ever told. The middle boy shouted, "You took our mama." The sheriff's smirk stayed, but a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Your mama was a criminal." "She wasn't," the youngest yelled. "You burned her." The square fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The sheriff's voice cooled. "Watch your mouth, boy." The cowboy's shoulders tightened. The girl stepped in front of her brothers, trembling but steady. "She begged for help," she said loudly. "And he helped her. That's why you hurt him." The crowd stirred again, louder this time. Someone whispered, "Is it true?" Someone else hissed, "They burned a woman alive." The sheriff snapped his fingers, and a dozen deputies stepped forward. "Enough. You three are comin' with us." "No," the girl said. "We ain't. You don't get to choose." The sheriff grinned. "That man's protection ended the day we stripped him of his badge." The cowboy lifted his head slowly. Deliberately. The girl felt the shift in him before he moved, a deep, steady ripple like the ground waking from sleep. The sheriff chuckled. "What, you gonna talk now? After all this time?" The cowboy stepped forward. His boots hit the boards with calm, measured weight. The deputies stiffened. The crowd held still. The sheriff smirked wider. "Go on," he taunted. "Say something, Dot." For the first time since the shack, since the fire, since his life burned to ash, the cowboy opened his mouth. His voice came out rough, low, and shaking, but strong enough to cut the square in half. "No more children will burn in this town." The words hit like a gunshot. Gasps spread across the crowd. Some people stepped back as if the voice itself carried heat. The sheriff's smirk vanished. "You just made a mistake," he hissed. Deputies raised rifles. Old families shifted nervously, their coats rustling like dead leaves. But the townspeople didn't move away. They moved forward. Whispering. Rising. Furious. Finally seeing. A woman in the crowd shouted, "You let those men do this." A man yelled, "You killed an innocent woman." Another cried, "We believed your lies." The sheriff turned pale. "Stop this. Stand down." But the people weren't listening to him anymore. They were listening to the man they once called Marshal. They surrounded the deputies, pushing them back. Voices grew louder, angry, betrayed, ready to tear down the chains they'd lived under. The cowboy didn't raise his rifle. Didn't step back. He watched the shift with calm sorrow, like a man witnessing the breaking of a long, cruel spell. The girl clasped his coat. "Mister, look!" The crowd surged against the old families, turning on them in a wave of long silent rage. And for the first time in years, the power in the town shifted. Not by fire. Not by fear. But by truth finally spoken. The chapter closed as the sheriff stumbled backward, surrounded by the very people he once controlled, his reign cracking like old bones in the dust. The sheriff stumbled as the townspeople closed in, their shouts rising like a storm he could no longer command. Deputies backed away, rifles lowering under the pressure of furious hands and voices. The old families clutched their coats, red patches suddenly looking like stains instead of symbols. The cowboy didn't move. He stood in the center of the square, breathing slow, watching the power he once upheld crumble around the men who had twisted it. The girl gripped his coat tightly. "Mister, what happens now?" The cowboy let out a long breath, one that seemed to drain years of weight from his shoulders. He didn't answer, but he turned toward the children, making sure all three stood behind him as the crowd surged forward. Several townsfolk pushed past the sheriff, binding his wrists with rough rope. He fought it, shouting curses, but no one listened. One woman spit at his boots. "You lied to us," she said. A man beside her added, "You lied about all of it." The kids watched wide-eyed as the deputies dropped their badges on the steps and backed away, ashamed. The girl whispered, "They're arresting them." The cowboy nodded once. The middle boy whispered, "What about us?" Before the cowboy could react, an older woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her hands trembled, but her voice held firm. "Marshal," she said softly. "You're welcome back." The word cracked the air like gentle thunder. The cowboy looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and quiet sorrow. Others joined in, voices softer, warmer. "We were wrong. You protected children. You paid for our blindness." The girl waited for him to speak, but he didn't. His silence wasn't empty anymore, it was steady, grounded, carrying something new. She tugged his sleeve. "They want you back." He looked down at her, the lines on his face softening. But then he knelt in front of the youngest boy and began tying the loose lace on his boot with careful hands. The boy froze. You don't gotta do that." The cowboy didn't respond. He finished tying the shoe, gave it a gentle tap, then stood again. The girl understood the message before her brothers did. He wasn't staying for the town. He was staying for them. The sheriff was dragged past, still fighting. "You think they'll protect you?" he shouted at the cowboy. "They'll turn on you again. They always do." The cowboy didn't even look at him. The girl stepped forward. "He ain't alone this time." The sheriff snarled, but the crowd drowned him out. As deputies led the old families away, the townspeople gathered around the cowboy, not too close, not forcing him, but offering quiet nods, murmured apologies, hesitant gratitude. A man spoke gently. "Marshal, we'll rebuild this town right, if you'll help us." The cowboy's eyes flicked toward the square, the broken doorframes, the faces filled with regret. He inhaled slowly, then shook his head. A simple, final no. The girl stepped beside him protectively. "He ain't comin' back," she said. "Not like before." A murmur rippled, soft but understanding. The cowboy turned away from the square, toward the open road leading back to the hills. The kids followed close, still holding on to him. The middle boy asked, "Where we gonna go now?" The cowboy paused. His gaze moved to the horizon, where the fog was lifting and the morning light painted the land in pale gold. The girl looked up at him. "You gave us shelter," she said. "Now let us give you a home." The words hung between them, gentle and certain. The cowboy's face softened with something almost tender. For the first time, he didn't look haunted, just tired, hopeful, human. He rested a hand on the girl's shoulder. Then he reached for his hat. The girl blinked when he placed it on her head, adjusting it carefully so it didn't fall over her eyes. The moment felt sacred, quiet, whole. The boy whispered, "Does this mean we're family now?" The cowboy didn't speak. He didn't need to. The girl smiled through tears. "Yeah," she whispered. "It does." And as they walked away from the town, together, the silence around them felt different. Not broken. Not punished. Not haunted. For the first time, it felt like peace.